I'm Shoshana.
And I'm Holly.
And you're listening to Future Talent Talks, a podcast that talks about all things early careers,
Gen A to Z, stereotypes, social and societal trends,
and everything in between.
Welcome back to episode number 2.
To episode number 2. For those of you that listened to episode number 1, I hope you enjoyed it and got to know
a bit about us.
Holly and I a little bit better. We definitely got to know each other a little bit better.
Yeah,
well.
we actually did.
Thought we knew everything.
I know.
We learned lots of new fun facts about you, which I loved. Today we're going to be getting to nitty gritty. I'm going to start getting into some of the topics we want to talk about. For today's episode, obviously we kind of are in September. We're coming into mid-September now, which is kind of peak onboarding period for most organisations and kind of most early careers teams. So what we're going to take some time to do today is to talk a little bit about onboarding.
So all our podcast episodes are going to be split into chapters to make it really easy and accessible for you guys to listen to. So today we've got it split into 4 chapters. Chapter 1 is about what to expect from young people entering your organisation. So how they're feeling, we're going to walk you through this. Chapter 2 is what they'll be like. So trends, common trends of young people coming in. We're going to dispel some myths for you guys as well. Chapter 3 is going to be things that you should cover in onboarding to really help your hires set up for success. And number 4 is sort of like a homework chapter. We're just going to give you some key things that you could be doing in order to help implement what we discuss today. So, without further ado, let's start on chapter 1. Before I start, actually, you might want to grab a pen and paper to create some notes throughout this episode because I'm sure there'll be a good few golden nuggets.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, yeah, thanks so much for that intro, Holly. So, I guess to kind of go into the topic, I think you said chapter 1 is going to be all about kind of how incoming graduates, apprentices, and maybe even kind of interns are feeling. So I guess from your perspective, like, how are they feeling?
Great question. Well, a lot of them are going to be feeling quite anxious. It's their first day. A lot of them, as we've said, it's their first time having a job for some of them. And so the nerves are going to be high. The tension's going to be high. They probably are going to be overthinking the very small things that a lot of people just know and that it will come naturally. I think a lot of people don't realise that the things that you think people know, they don't know. And that's something that is so important, I think, to start this off on, because even I do it myself, like for building my business, I think everyone knows what I know. It's super basic. They just don't. So things like what to wear, where do I go to from the train station to the office? What does that journey look like? What do I even bring on the first day? How do I introduce myself? Like all these basic things people won't know because at the end of the day, schools and colleges don't actually teach you these things.
Yeah, and I feel like especially for things like induction, it's really important to be like super specific on things like you said, like what to wear, but not only just say like, oh, it's smart casual. Like that can be quite confusing to a young person. Like what does smart casual even mean? Especially when you see some of the videos on TikTok from like, not to be rude, but like influencers who have never worked in an office in their lives and are just doing, you know, PLT and like ASOS hauls because they're earning commission on it, and they call them office kind of hauls or get ready with me, and the stuff they're just recommending to wear is just not what you'd recommend in an office. So I think even if you haven't already, or maybe throughout or at some point, just be super clear on like what they're expected to wear and give examples, and visual examples of like, it sounds very stupid, but like trust me, go on to like Boohoo, PLT, and like some of the things under the workwear section you would not be wearing to work. And obviously if it's someone that is starting their first job, etc., they're probably not going to know these things. So I think giving like specific visual examples for like little things like that are quite important as well.
I think there'll also be a feeling of like excitement, obviously, and they'll be probably feeling quite proud because if you've watched the first episode, you would have known mine and Shoshana's story. I went through over 30 rejections before getting into a degree apprenticeship. So there's so many people that we will have gone through so many rejections before entering this company. And so they will be going through a range of emotions. They could feel really excited, happy. They could also feel quite exhausted, to be honest with you, because this is the process is so long. And also they could even feel like quite isolated, because if they're having conversations and one of their peers has just applied for like 2 or 3 and they've applied for a lot, there can be a lot of different emotions there, and there might be a bit of embarrassment. You just never know.
I think also, just to add on to that, that kind of subconscious like comparison piece of you're starting a cohort of like 20, 30, 40, 50 other people, you're all starting on exactly the same day. That internal comparison piece literally starts from day one. Whether they realise it or not, it's bound to happen. So in their heads, probably going to be overthinking everything, comparing, etc. Which is, I mean, we'll talk about it more when we talk about kind of what to cover. But one thing I always recommend to like employers is to just let them know like that, number one, they probably are gonna be, you know, there is that comparison piece that's gonna happen, but also remind them of the importance of kind of their journey. Everyone's journey is different, and there will be people that take different paths or move on quicker than others, but every kind of second they waste comparing themselves to other people takes time away from them getting themselves to where they want to be.
Yeah, so true. I think it's also important to remind the new starter that they are valued in this workplace, and they've chosen them for a reason. Because especially if they're going in and they're discussing like their journeys to getting an apprenticeship, which is quite a common thing now, if someone, as I said before, has applied to a lot and someone hasn't, they might be questioning, why am I here? How have I gone through so many rejections, this person hasn't? And also probably probation will be on a lot of people's minds as well. And so it's like reminding them that they're here for a reason, they deserve to be here, is so important, because they could be questioning their place in this cohort.
It's almost mindset and like working on, like, obviously they're all going to be super nervous, and I think it doesn't have to be induction, doesn't have to be at the onboarding stage, but at some point earlier on the journey, and I won't go into too much of what to include, but I feel like mindset is so important. Mindset needs to be the number one thing, I think, first thing they learn, because if your mindset is not in the right place, you're not going to be able to do anything else. You're going to be constantly doubting yourself, going to be constantly comparing yourself to other people. And like, there are plenty of employers who have maybe a growth mindset workshop at some point in their program, but if that's 2, 3, 5, 6 months down the line, that's no use. The mindset needs to be in a good place, I think, from the very beginning and from the very get-go, almost before anything. But I don't want to go too much into that. So obviously we've touched upon kind of some of the ways they're feeling. We've spoken about obviously nervous, anxious. I think just to add, like, there will be some people that don't seem nervous, the kind of really confident, really cocky ones. They are nervous deep down, right? They just, it's a front. I think everyone's different. Some people are visibly nervous. Some people are invisibly nervous. But I think in general, everyone's just going to be really, really nervous. I think unsure of what to expect.
Yeah.
Because
they've never done this before.
They've not done this before. Maybe some of them might have worked part-time jobs. Maybe some of them done internships. Not everyone. But I think just in general, you don't really learn during education about like realistic, and I won't go into this too much because we have an episode on it, realistic career expectations and what working in kind of a full-time job post-graduation or post-school or college actually looks like. And because you aren't taught that, you come up with this, you form your own ideals based on largely probably social media, right?
And your parents.
Yeah. And we both know the type of content that's going around on social media. So they'll be feeling, if not at the beginning, but definitely at the end, depending on kind of how long your induction or onboarding period is, overwhelmed. I feel like lots of employers, they've got a week-long induction period or 2-week long, and they almost just try and cram as much content as they can into that period. And that's extremely overwhelming for someone that's starting a completely new environment, and maybe someone that maybe struggles with anxiety or nerves anyway. So probably going to be feeling overwhelmed at some point.
And it also goes back to the whole process, the whole application process. They're probably feeling really overwhelmed by as well. So before they've even come into your business, they're like, I need a moment to breathe, you know?
Yeah.
And they've probably just finished A-levels, or they've just left a part-time job, or whatever it is they've experienced in their personal life. They've gone through all those applications as well. And so, just chucking them into a few weeks of intensive like onboarding and getting straight into everything can be quite overwhelming.
Yeah.
It's another really great point to consider.
It's a lot.
Brilliant. So now we've covered a little bit of what they're going to be feeling. We're going to move swiftly on to chapter 2. So chapter 2 is all about what they'll be like trend-wise and dispelling the myths around this. So, Shoshana, what are the key things you've seen around this?
Well, I think I think one thing that's just important to really mention is whether we realise it or not, we are all seeing these kind of new headlines that are popping up every single day at this point about Gen Z, right? And whether we realise it or not, subconsciously they are creating biases and thoughts and predispositions about an entire generation and group of people before they've even walked in the door, right? Which, if we're completely honest with ourselves, it's not fair, right? Because number one, these are generalizations and every individual is different, but then also equally every generation has always had generalization, so it's actually really unfair. So I think just taking some time to just, you know, have a think and just have a reflective, do you know what, whatever I've heard about these young people, I'm gonna leave that at the door and I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt. And I know most people do that, but equally most people don't realize that there are some kind of subconscious biases and themes, because I speak to lots of employers and some of the same things sometimes come up. The two that I'm sure we've all heard are the kind of lazy, entitled themes. I guess to give my thoughts on the entitled piece, I don't think I don't think young people are entitled. I think that they are all, obviously not everyone, but most of them, they are super, super, super motivated to progress, partly due to the fact that they kind of feel like they're behind, especially due to COVID, when their lives were on pause for like 2 to 3 years. Many people still feel like they're kind of playing catch up with that. Combined with social media, where you have the ability to essentially compare your life and where you're at to every single other person in your age group instantly, anywhere in the world, anywhere in the country, that is creating that feeling of them kind of feeling behind. Not everyone, but for lots. And obviously then that is kind of pushing them to do well. So they'll come into the workforce and yeah, they're going to be super motivated to progress, and they may want to walk before they can run, and they may have a 6-month placement assigned, but within 2 months they may think they're ready to move on. I don't think that's being entitled. I think that's them being motivated and them not necessarily knowing how to kind of navigate those conversations. So I think as employers, as managers, as early careers teams, we need to, number one, harness that kind of motivation and want to progress, because that's amazing and those are the type of people we need in our companies. But also we need to help them navigate those conversations and realize that, you know what, you've been put in a 6-month placement for a reason. You know, why do you think you're ready to kind of progress after 2 months? Because a lot of the time when you ask them, there's not always a genuine reason. It's maybe because they have a friend at a different company that's already moved on to something, or they've seen someone else on their cohort doing something. Do you know what I mean? But also helping them navigate that and helping them know the right way to have those conversations. Because yes, sometimes maybe the way it's phrased, or maybe to someone who doesn't have that whole context of the social media and pandemic piece, that could seem entitled, but I personally don't think it is.
I agree with you. I don't think Gen Z are entitled at all. I think, to echo your piece about social media, we have this device in our hand where we can access so much information, it is a joke. We can access so much more information than any of the previous generations. So as a result, we are learning so much quicker than other generations, it seems. And people are starting businesses so much younger. The amount of Gen Z directors, limited company directors, has increased. We're just seeing so much more people start things a lot earlier, grow big businesses, etc., because we have so much information. We have access to all this information. Whereas previously, someone might have had to network with someone, know someone that can teach them that thing, or read books, which takes much longer than a 60-second video, whatever it is. And so as a result of that, we're feeling like we've got so much value to give at such a young age. And so it's not entitlement, it's actually we're raring to go. We've got all this value to give. We want to show you that we can give it.
Yeah.
We want to progress, like you say, and we want to make an impact, you know?
Yeah. I 100% agree, but then I also feel like ultimately there's a right way to go about that, and sometimes it can be misconstrued and taken in the wrong way. For example, if your manager, I don't know, is someone that's been at the company for like 10 plus years and you've just joined in as an apprentice or graduate and you've been there for like 6 months and you are coming and asking for a promotion because you've seen someone else do that on social media, and really you don't necessarily understand what you actually need to do to gain a promotion. That's great that you feel like you have value to give, and that's great that you have asked, but equally that's probably not going to happen because that's not how most organizations work. And a lot of the young people and a lot of the companies we work with, they're not startups, right? If you're working in a 2-person, 5-person startup, then yeah, that's realistic. You could start at 18 and be promoted within 6 months. But if you're joining an apprenticeship program, which you're doing a degree apprenticeship and it's like 4 years long, it's been laid out and you've had specific pathways. Or if you're joining a graduate program, but nobody tells them these things because you're not taught it at school. And I feel like, in my opinion, a lot of the times employers give such a glossy image throughout the recruitment process because they're so desperate to kind of get all these applications that, you know, a lot of the time the realism of what the job actually includes in terms of paths to progression, etc., are missed, or they're not, the whole truth isn't told. So yeah, I completely agree with you. They do 100% have lots of value to give, but equally, like, there's like a way to go about it, because otherwise it could be misconstrued in the wrong way, which is totally no malice from their side. They're just doing what they know how, and they
Exactly, yeah. And I think combining the 2 points of what we've said together is really important. So understanding where they're coming from in terms of, it's not a place of entitlement, it's a place of, we want to give value, we want to make an impact, we've got high expectations for ourselves. You know, we've seen all these successful people, these insane like lives that people live, insane careers on social media. We want to get there, we want to get there fast, like and combining that with, okay, great, we really appreciate that, we understand that, let's just set some expectations here. And like you say, laying out a clear pathway in terms of progression is so important.
I don't think any generation is lazy. I think that, you know, Gen Z, you know, the traditional 9 to 5 is being challenged, right? I personally think the traditional 9 to 5 is not fit for purpose anymore because times are changing. But, you know, I don't blame them for not wanting to work all hours of the day, especially when realistically, when you're someone that's starting out your career, your salary is going to be pretty low, cost of living is going to be pretty high. You are going to be doing those kind of 9 to 5 hours and then getting the hell out of there, so that, number one, you can maybe start a side hustle, so that you can start making more money, so that you can start building a future for yourselves, or so that you can work on other things, or even just so that your, you know, life is not 100% relying on your job. Because we've all had friends and family members who have worked for like 20-30 years and not only don't have necessarily much to show for it, but also equally they've been loyal to their employees and then they've just been made redundant or got rid of like that. So, you know, we've seen that happen to past generations. We've seen that happen to friends and family. So no, it doesn't mean that we're lazy because we don't want to stay late every night for work. That means we have boundaries, right? And also we have goals that we want to achieve. Equally, again, back to my point, I feel like employers aren't always upfront about what certain roles involve. So, you know, most people, most Gen Z, most young people, no issue with, you know, staying late every so often when they need to, or work late. But, you know, if you're an organisation that you know, in reality you're going to work late most nights of the week, and you've not made that clear in the recruitment process, and you've led people to believe that they're going to be working 9 to 5, when they then get in the job and that looks different, you know, you can't complain, right? Because you've just completely hid that from them. So I also, again, feel like there's this facade of employers, and they make this, sometimes, not everyone, makes this glossy version of the role, and they almost don't want to kind of highlight the negatives or the hard things. And even when it comes to induction, it's all made out to kind of be so amazing, and they think it's going to be so amazing, and they think that it's just going to be this amazing experience, that when challenges do happen and problems do happen, it just crashes down because they've been led to believe that they're applying for this amazing job, which is going to be amazing the whole time, blah, blah, blah. I know I'm rambling, but that's my point. Hopefully you get what I mean.
100%. I think social media has a lot to play in that as well.
Yes.
If you see like day in the life of marketing people and like whatever, people in law, and they're going into these glossy offices, and they're going to the gym or shopping at lunch, and they're doing all of this. And so I think it's not entirely down to the employer's sort of marketing. It's just generic on social media as well. There's so many unrealistic expectations. Yeah, and I think you're right. It's so important to actually set the realistic expectations in terms of your progression, your actual schedule, what that actually looks like. And I feel like we're getting a bit onto chapter 3.
Yes, exactly. Oh, before we do, can I just touch upon one piece?
Yeah, sure.
Another piece I want to touch upon in terms of like what they'll be like is obviously we've spoken a little bit about anxiety and things, but I think in general mental health is quite a big thing for the younger generation at the moment. There's a figure which I don't know if I can say the company name, so I won't say it, but it's kind of a consulting firm. They did some research and it says that 7 in 10 Gen Z have either been diagnosed with a short-term or long-term mental health condition. That is huge. That is 70%, right? And I just think that's so important because, you know, if you were struggling with your mental health, how the hell are you expected to start a job and do a good job of it, especially if you're not getting that support anywhere? So that's one thing employers really need to, of course, not only be aware of, but also think about how they're going to deal with and how they're going to provide that support. And then again, I think that leads us on perfectly to the next chapter, Holly.
So I think one thing that you can do, relating to the point we just spoke about, to help set up expectations between your early career candidates is to actually allow them to speak to current apprentices, graduates, interns, etc., to actually get a realistic representation of what is involved in the job, because those people are already in the job. They already know exactly what's expected of them. They've been doing it for a while, and it's so helpful. I did that when I started the apprenticeship I was on, and I can't even tell you how helpful it was. The tips, advice, the realistic expectations that I gained from it was so much better. And I think especially if you do that before the candidates are actually hired, you're then putting these things out so that you're going to attract the right candidates, you're going to get rid of the wrong candidates.
Giving people the opportunity to like select themselves out if they want to. I feel like that's so important. Even before then, I can't remember, but I was reading an article and I was reading some type of book around employer branding, and it was an organisation that did a test because they were getting lots of applications, but they were getting the wrong types of applications, and they were only getting a small percentage of like the type of people they actually wanted. So they almost put on their job description like something like, don't apply for this job if, or you know, these are the not so great part of the job, please only apply if you're kind of willing to do these things. And they had a much lower volume of applications, but everyone that applied was willing to do the nitty gritty, right? And I don't see any employers doing that. I see I see even simple job descriptions or videos or promotional etc., where it's focusing all the positives, which is great. But you want to bring people in that are willing to the nitty gritty, that are willing to do the bad things as well. But you've not told them those things. So can you really moan when they start the job and they are not willing to do those things? I was with a law firm client a few weeks ago, and they were telling me that their trainee lawyers like don't want to work late. And I said to them, do you let them know that that's part of the job, or do you just assume that they know? Because law TikTok is a huge thing at the moment, right? And there's so much, it's an amazing career path, don't get me wrong, but like it looks super glamorous and like it's a great career path, but it's not as glamorous as it seems. And I said, do you let them know that you have to work lots of, or do you kind of just assume that? And they said, oh, you know, we don't specifically let them know. And I said, well, maybe you should do that, because ideally you don't want to necessarily be wasting your time and resources on hiring people who aren't necessarily willing to do the nitty gritty and who understand that there's going to be nitty gritty parts of every job. So
true.
I'm rambling, but even just saying really it at the get-go.
There's so much talk about being authentic with branding, right? And even in life as individuals, everyone says be authentic, be transparent, because then you're going to attract and repel the right people. But when it comes to brands and employer brands, there's the word authentic thrown around here and there, but it's not really action, like you say. There needs to be the two sides of it, and I think that's such a good point and idea. Putting out there what we can offer, what is expected of you, and the more like realistic negative side, as some people would think, should also be put out there, because that is the authentic job,
and people respect that. Because otherwise, you're just going to get loads of people, but they're only applying. They only want the shiny version of that job that you're portraying. They don't want the realistic version of the job where it's you work 9 to 5 most days, but you know there's going to be the odd day or the odd week where you have to work, you know, really late.
Yeah, and I think going back to the whole Gen Z piece, you mentioned earlier about boundaries. I think Gen Z we're a generation that is really coming into ourselves and developing these boundaries and around our personal lives and professional lives and integrating those into each other. And if a young person's not understanding these expectations, they come into the job, as you've mentioned about the law firm, this is going to cross their boundaries because they are expecting to work in these specific hours. And so then that's jeopardizing on other things that they really value and that's important to them. And so, yeah, ultimately, the right candidates haven't been attracted. So I think, yeah, portraying the realistic side. I feel like some employers can be a bit nervous to do that because they think, well, we won't attract anyone. But that's not the case because not everyone...
Would you rather you have 5 amazing people that you've hired, or you have like 100 people that just don't want to do the job and you have issues with? Like,
but also not everyone is out there saying we don't want to work late. Like, people generalize Gen Z as a whole.
no, I think most people are willing to do it as every so often, as long as it's not like an everyday thing. Anyone, Gen Z, regardless of it, like, most people get when it's explained to them, when it's at the get-go that, yeah, you know, in some jobs, or when it's explained to them in some jobs, you have to work late. There's going to be some days and weeks where we have deadlines and we need to work later to get them, or sometimes you're going to have to travel or do things, or, you know, it's actually really hard studying for a degree whilst also working full-time. I don't think that... Anyway, other episodes, let's not digress. Shall we move on to
chapter 3?
Yes.
So chapter 3 is all about things employers should cover in onboarding.
And kind of tips and tricks that you can kind of implement, regardless of whether your onboarding period is past or your onboarding period is just about to begin. Holly, I don't know if you have any initial thoughts, because I've done a lot of yapping.
So I think another thing that's a really good idea to help setting expectations is to sort of give someone like a manual when they first come into the business. So we've spoke about the marketing beforehand and what that should look like to set expectations. But when someone comes in, I think there's so many different types of learners. You know, you've got the onboarding where you can speak verbally, you can present, so you've got the visual elements, etc. But if someone's better with something in writing that they can always refer to, I think actually having like a handbook would be a really great idea. I didn't personally get this. I had to create all my own notes, etc. But giving them that handbook with people that they can go to if they experience XYZ problem, all the notes that they need to know about systems, expectations in terms of work hours, what to do when you experience XYZ, like all these different things. That could be a really great idea for starters.
And I think also people that maybe want to take it one step further have all the content you mentioned within a handbook, but have it in different content types as well, because obviously different people have different preferences. So can you chop up each chapter of the handbook and make it like a short video, or can you make it into checklists? Because I love reading, I love handbooks, etc. But you know, some people are like really against it.
Exactly.
But absolutely.
Some of the work I do with my employers is actually I create them videos as well. So this is another thing that you could do. So for example, I mentioned at the start of the episode, sometimes people will be really nervous in terms of even getting to the office. So like when they're leaving the train station, how the hell do I get to the office? What does that look like? So if you created a video like, here's what to do when you leave the train station, here's where we're located, here's what door to go to, here's what to press, here's who to call. And then things like, on your first day, here's what to expect. You'll arrive at this time, you'll meet this person, you'll do XYZ task. On your first week, here's what to expect. Here's some of the apprentices' advice. And creating those videos is also really important.
Remove as much anxiety from the process as you can. I mean, that would be appreciated by anyone, especially, for example, people that are neurodivergent and they really specifically need everything to be explained to them, which
literally
we both are explained to them in like...
That would have helped me so much, because anywhere I go, it's on Google Maps and I'm like clicking on Google Earth, like, which way do I go? And I'm viewing it all just to see where I'm going. So if I had a video like that to know where to go, that'd be so helpful.
Yeah, no, that one of my clients, they've had a few requests, I know, for assessment centres, but I think even for onboarding, of like apprentices asking if they can like bring their mum along, which obviously to like you and I and like people that have worked, that sounds really silly. But obviously...
What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, let's break it down. Someone that has literally just finished school or college, an 18-year-old probably has never left their town. Yeah, so for them to go to an assessment centre in a completely different town 2 hours away, or that is anxiety inducing. That's scary. So it makes sense why they would ask to bring their mum. I don't think they should be allowed to bring their mum, but I understand the thought process. But so for you as an employer, what can you do to remove that anxiety from the process so that that person feels confident enough to come on their own instead of just laughing and having a snigger and saying, oh, snowflake generation, this person wants to bring their mum along, because that's what some people do. So that's my thoughts on that one.
Yeah, nice. So what other points do you think employers should cover?
So I guess, oh God, where do I start? Lots of things. I think first and foremost, and this isn't necessarily something they should cover for onboarding, but it's something they need to be prepared for, is line managers. You can give your graduates and apprentices and early career starters the absolute best onboarding development program in the world, right? But if they do not have the right support from the manager, that is all going to be a waste, because arguably the most vital and crucial kind of element of their success is going to be their manager, right? Because that is the one person they rely on for support, guidance, etc. So if their manager isn't aligned and doesn't feel supported, all that time, money you're investing is going to be a waste, right? So I think it's really, really important that managers feel equipped in the right way. This is something I feel very passionate about. This is something I spend lots of time doing.
Is something you're the queen of.
With employers, is helping empower their managers to kind of understand and engage young people better. Because the reality is, managing a young person in 2024 is different from managing a young person several years ago, pre-COVID. It's different times. It's also different from managing a normal employee.
Could you share some of the differences?
Well, I think we've kind of gone through them, but obviously the kind of mental health piece, much higher rates of kind of mental health, the combination of kind of that feeling of like social media mixed with the cost of living crisis, it is creating new challenges which are specifically showing up at work, whether that be anxiety to do things that maybe seem simple to you and I, like pick up the phone or have your camera on, etc. Like a lot of the time, things like, oh, well, someone's not putting their camera on, that can be misconstrued by a manager as they're not interested or they're entitled. But the reality is there's a multitude of reasons why that could be. So I think it's really important for line managers to understand like who Gen Z are, what are some of the things that they're going through, how some of these themes are showing up at work, and how they can not only support them but also, you know, set proper expectations from the get-go. As it's great if you as an early careers team set those expectations with them at onboarding, but they're going to forget about them 5 minutes later, right? So their manager needs to be set those and be consistent with those. So I think manager support is really, really key. Equally, we've spoken about it before, but I just think being like really realistic with them, and that, you know, onboarding can be very kind of airy-fairy, but you know, the job is going to have there are going to be bad days, there are going to be hard times, and almost setting that kind of expectational realization at the beginning is really, really helpful, because otherwise then if they go along thinking it's going to be amazing the whole time, when those bad times and bad days do happen, it's really, really hard, right? But if you know this is going to happen, this is normal.
And also, who can they go to when they have those bad days?
Exactly.
Can you teach the managers and also the young people how to speak about those things and have conversations with those things? Because I feel like a lot of people are worried in terms of where is the line between personal and professional, and if someone doesn't have that home life where they can go and speak to these things about, it's like work is the next best thing. And how do they engage with their manager on that kind of level?
Yeah, absolutely. And even outside of their manager, help them map out their support network, because most of the time it's not just their manager. They're going to have a buddy, they're going to have a mentor, there's going to be another apprentice on their they've got a whole support network of people, because the reality is not everyone is going to get on with their manager,
and most people don't feel comfortable speaking about this type of stuff with their manager.
Exactly.
So mapping out that network is so important. Buddies are literally so useful. And again, that can go in things like the handbook as well, and also,
or even an activity that they do like at one of the onboarding days of like
to elaborate on that buddy point, I think creating like a network of buddies that have specific tasks they need to do and have structure is so important, because personally, from my experience, buddies are great in the first instance when you meet them, etc., but then they just fizzle out and they get busy, etc. I totally get it. Life happens. But actually, I think setting expectations of buddies and structure is almost as though it's like a program that they can then add in their performance reviews and
Yeah,
it can actually
definitely.
benefit them is so important to actually keeping that consistent.
Yeah, because like I said, like we said before, like a young person might see that their body's busy and then they may not have the confidence to reach out to them when they need them, and it just again creates this echo chamber of maybe someone that is suffering and struggling and they do just feel like they don't have anyone to talk to. So absolutely. Just a few other points from my side. I think things like, and again, it doesn't actually, I do think it's important to kind of cover actually before they start, if you do kind of discovery days or taster days or even during onboarding, it's just some basic like financial literacy around things like budgeting, like understanding how much you're going to be paid, what that looks like outside of tax, um like costs you're going to have, like rent, bills, like they won't, especially like apprentices who are literally leaving school or college, they are probably going to have, and like not everyone is from like backgrounds and families who are like like hugely financially literate. Like I'm not necessarily from one of those, so not everyone is going to have this knowledge. Most of them won't, and it's really important because again, we live in expensive times, and if someone is stressing about how they're going to pay their bills or if they're going to have enough money left at the end of the month, that stress is going to flow into work and it's going to impact their work.
So true. Things like tax codes and also even like mortgages and things like that. Those are all things that whilst they're with you as an employer, hopefully they're with you long term, they're going to be interested in, they're going to be getting, obtaining. So even things like that aren't directly related to the job is still super important.
Yeah, I think definitely onboarding like just the basics, but then definitely like further down the line, the pieces you mentioned for sure. So basic financial literacy, and then I think just a key point for me is revisit things again, right? Like I said before, they learn loads at induction, and I think it's called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve or something, and it basically shows you that within 7 days you've forgotten about kind of 90% of information, because humans are forgetting machines. We forget things. Mix that with the nerves of starting a new job. Realistically, most of the stuff they're learning at induction they are going to forget, so you are going to need to kind of consistently revisit some of these topics at different points.
Need that handbook and the videos.
Well, they do, but even it's great to like have a handbook, but like, are they going to read it? Sometimes people need to be told. So think about when you're going to revisit things, how you're going to engage managers throughout that process, and over communicate. That is one. Over communicate, right? Everyone has different experience levels, everyone has different understandings of things that are different, and 90% of the time when you think you've communicated something enough, you haven't, right? So yes, you may need to be that annoying person that every time you send an email, at the beginning of the email you'll be like, okay, just let you know, like, these are your objectives for the week. Or at the beginning of every one-on-one, maybe a manager needs to say, before we talk about this, let's walk through what your objectives are for every single one-on-one. Yes, the manager may sound like a broken record, but there's no chance in hell that person is going to forget, right? So I think the main thing I'm trying to say is, don't just think you've covered something at induction, you've covered something at onboarding, it never needs to be covered again, or it can't be doesn't need to be covered again until next year, because that's not the case. Think about when you're going to revisit these things at different points throughout their journey, and when you're going to kind of create opportunities for like reinforced learning, basically.
Yeah, I love this. I also wanted to mention that I think everything we're discussing here is also really important for the interim keep warm period before a new starter begins. So I know, especially for apprenticeships, there's often with the corporate schemes quite a big chunk of time between an offer and the start time. So actually, this onboarding stuff needs to be feeded way before even the September or whatever it is start time. Probably the same for graduates and internships. And so putting these videos out can be a great way to give people a taster, doing masterclasses, maybe online sessions, and like you say, over communicating. That needs to be way before they even step foot in your business and start on the day. The over communication point is so important. I really like what you said there, because people are getting offers and getting distracted by loads of other companies, and so actually if you're constantly on the ball, they're going to keep remembering you. So I really wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, no, that's one of the things I've been doing with M&S, for example. They have like these discovery days, and one of the sessions I help them develop and I've been running is like how to set yourself up for success professionally and personally before you join.
Love that.
So we go through like a lot of the things we've spoken about, like mental health, budgeting, your job isn't going to be amazing, and at the end of it they kind of all come
Your
away
job isn't
with
gonna be amazing.
no, you know what I mean, like, your job isn't going to be amazing the whole
Yeah.
time, all of these things, so that they have that kind of period or month before they start, they can actually they all walk away with at least kind of 2 or 3 to-do list items that they can work on, whether it's just something as simple as starting to get up earlier so they're in a routine, because for most of them they'll be going to bed at like 3-4 a.m. during the summer, or mapping out a budget of like based on how much they're earning, like how much they're going to be left with, or just really simple things like that, which take away lots of the kind of anxiety that you have, so that when they actually do start they can be present and they can focus. So
I love that.
okay, so I think we've spoken enough now.
I had one more point.
Oh God, Holly, you don't have to cover everything, but go for it.
One more point. I think the last thing that I would say that employers should cover is something around emotional intelligence. This doesn't get spoken about a lot, and it is so important around having conversations at work and having awkward conversations, and what we spoke about before in terms of if someone's struggling and they don't have that supportive home life or friends that they can go to, they need to develop a level of emotional intelligence to be able to articulate themselves, to be able to feel confident to go and speak to someone. It comes down as well to conflict at work. If something's an awkward situation, if something's gone a bit wrong in projects, how do they get around that? And I know for me, for so long I've sort of struggled with the connection between personal and professional emotional intelligence and how I navigate that, because I was fine in my personal life, but when it comes to professional, it's like, oh, you can't say anything, you have to keep quiet, it's not professional. But actually having those conversations can be so important to growth. And so teaching them something around emotional intelligence, how to articulate things, how to handle conflict, so important, because as you say, it's not going to be all happy Larry all the time. Like this is real stuff that happens in the workplace, that happens at work, that happens in life. And schools and colleges, as you guys will know, they don't teach that. So we need to be there to support them with that.
Absolutely. Okay, so
I'm sure we could go much more into all of that, but we are short of time. So we're going to have to wrap up.
Yes.
So we're going to move on to the last chapter, chapter 4, which is essentially
a very, very short chapter.
A very, very short chapter. And it is just going to quickly give you a brief overview of everything we spoke about.
So I think in terms of kind of key actions to take away, I think our main action for everyone listening, obviously whether your onboarding has passed or whether it's just about to start, give yourself 5 or 10 minutes to write down your kind of top 3 takeaways from this episode and have a little think about how you're going to implement them, whether those are going to kind of be immediate implementations or, you know, implementations you're kind of going to do further down the line. We've kind of given you a brain dump of everything we know and everything we think today. There's going to be lots in here, so it's really important you kind of take some time to decipher the key takeaways, like for you individually. So yeah, that would be the action for today.
Thank you for listening to Future Talent Talks. For more on me, Holly,
and me, Shoshana,
make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and to follow the podcast
and to tune back in next Monday. P.S. Don't forget to check out the email in the show notes where you can share any of your feedback from the episode and also any future topics you would love us to talk about. We look forward to hearing from you, and thank you so much for listening.